All right, Rev students, how are you guys doing? Am I safe up here? Any bows in the crowd aiming to take me out? McKinley was very excited to shoot a bow and arrow at me. I'm a little worried about her. Not very excited about catching her in a dark alley. She probably is going to start carrying a bow around with her everywhere. She's that type of person. She's committed. She's focused. Well, if you don't know this, how many of y'all, I saw a lot of y'all's hand raised earlier, one-night people. Where are all my one-night people at last week? Awesome. If you weren't there last week, man, you missed out on an absolutely phenomenal time. Not only just an awesome time of fun, but an awesome time of God just moving and being in this place. I'm excited to see just what comes out of that time together. But we are starting off our new year and starting off a new series. It's actually a series we've done before. We do this series at the beginning of every school year. It's called Welcome to the Revolution. Now, this might come as a surprise to you, but our church's name is Revolution Church. I know. You guys, you're like, I see it. This is good marketing. I'm already submitting my application to Apple for my new marketing job because I'm so clever and come up with all these awesome and fun things. But yeah, it's called Welcome to the Revolution. The idea behind this is that God is welcoming us, that he has invited us to be a part of what he's doing here. You are welcome to join in on what he is doing here. And the way we do that here at Revolution Church is we believe that God calls us to love Jesus and grow people. And specifically for our student ministry, he calls us to love Jesus and to grow students. And the way we do that is through an acronym called GROW. And that's what we're going to be talking about throughout this entire series. I'm going to break it down. If you're a note taker, this is a great thing to take notes on. But the acronym GROW stands for Gospel, Relationships, Obedience, and Works. The thing that God is inviting us into, the thing that God is welcoming us to be a part of is to do this right here. That as we respond to the gospel, as the gospel is preached, as we live the truth of who Jesus is and what he's done. And that's what we're going to be talking about this week. We're going to be getting way more into that. And as we begin living that out in relationships with each other, and that as we're being obedient in the areas of our lives that God is calling us to, that God would give us good works to work that out in, and that the communities around us and the people around us would see there's something different going on here. That they would see that, hey, there is something going on, that God would be getting the glory of what is going on. The word revolution, one definition for it is a sudden marked change. The word revolution, a sudden marked change. That's what you see in when you look at like a revolutionary war, that there is a sudden marked change in direction of government. That they had these ideas and these principles, and they said, hey, we're going in a different direction, and if you don't let us, we are going to fight about it. A sudden marked change. And that's what we believe the gospel does in our life. That as we encounter Jesus, as he begins to change our lives, as we begin to walk through these things, gospel, relationships, obedience, and works, that God begins to change us, and there is a marked change in our lives that people see, and they say, hey, something is going on there. Something is happening there. And so this week we're talking about the gospel. The gospel, the word gospel means good news. And specifically for us, when we talk about the good news, we're talking about the good news of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done. And I think it's important for us to understand this, that when we're talking about the gospel, when we're talking about the good news, that we understand that it's truly good news. I'm not sure the last good news you received in your life. Maybe you went to a dentist appointment and you're like, I already know what's coming for me. I have eaten too much candy, and cavities is the result of my lifestyle and living that I have been in for the last couple. And you go there, and the dentist is like, good news, no cavities, right? Maybe that was the last good news you received. Maybe you're in your first week of school, and you've already got a good grade on a paper or a test, and you're like, good news, I'm already exceeding expectations for the years. The thing about good news is it has to be in contrast to another type of news, bad news. Something has to happen that makes it good news, that makes it beneficial for us. The best way I feel like I could explain this is by telling you a story. Not my story. I have a lot of great stories. I won't get into them today, especially for a lot of our new sixth graders. Where are our new sixth graders at? Where are you guys at? We're so excited you guys are here. Listen, you don't know this, but I have some pretty amazing stories, and you are going to benefit from listening to me sharing them. But today is not that day. That'll have to be another day. You'll have to come back for it. Today, I want to tell you the story of the Titanic. How many know what the Titanic is? All right, so for some of you, this will be informational, or you just don't want to pay attention to what I'm saying, and therefore you did not raise your hand out of principle and spite. Either way, I'm still going to tell the story of the Titanic. If you don't know why the Titanic was such a big deal, it was really a first of its kind, this huge luxury liner that was going to carry people across the world. It was considered an unsinkable ship, and people lined up to be on it. How many of y'all have been on a cruise? Okay, how many of y'all have seen a cruise ship? Was it just not breathtaking how big it was? You're just sitting there, you're like, how did someone even make this thing, right? It is ridiculous when you see how big. I, unfortunately, have never been on a cruise. One of my stories that you'll eventually hear is how I can't have good vacations. And so I've tried to go on 4 different cruises, and they've all been canceled. And we've just decided that that's not the life that the Lord has let us lead and live. And so we've just gone other routes. And so we just go to like a pool and like push a little boat around. And we're like, this is what it could be. But so yeah, that's why it was such a big deal. It was this luxury liner, the most affluent, the most rich people lined up to be on it. It was supposed to be unsinkable, and they set off on April 10th in 1912 with 2,240 passengers aboard. At this time, there's probably only a handful of ships that could even hold that many people, and they take off, and 5 days into their journey, they strike an iceberg. And so that they didn't know, that they had warnings that there was icebergs. They didn't see it coming till it's too late. I feel like most of y'all know the direction where this story is going. They hit the iceberg. The ship begins to start sinking. The captain issues the command for people to go to the lifeboats. Women and children go first. They sent out alerts and SOSs. People immediately started leaving the nearest ports and heading there to rescue people. But within a couple of hours, the ship had already sunk, and more than 1,500 crew and passengers had already died. It was truly a tragedy of its time, especially because of the story that they had been telling. It is unsinkable. This is the safest thing you could be. This is the best place you could be, and then tragedy strikes. And I know for me, it really is a shame that why people know about the Titanic. They don't know it because of its innovation. They don't know about the Titanic because of the byproduct of the tragedy, where they began to develop new technology to keep it safe, like sonar, so they could detect things in the water. That's not how people know the Titanic. They know it because of this picture right here. This is why people know the Titanic. Because on that day, because of the tale of 2 young people that fell in love in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it does beg the question, if you've been here before, if you've seen this movie, if you know the story, at the end of the movie, they're sitting in frigid cold water. Why are we listening to the music? Because it's amazing. I'm setting a mood here. Do you not know? This is the better version of this song. This is the recorder version. It's highly superior than the Celine Dion version, if you're not familiar with it. Yeah, all right. We could go ahead and cut the music off. But so here's the thing. Some of you have already said it. Here is my problem. Here's the greatest tragedy for me, and some of you have already said it. There is absolutely room for Jack on the door. And just to prove my point, I have the next picture right here. As you can see in Exhibit A, as they're sitting in the water, yes, at surface level, it does seem like the room is tight. But if you were willing to get creative, there's tons of, you can even play cards while you wait for rescue crews to come and get you. And listen, students, don't miss this. This has become so controversial that they have even decided to make money off of this. Go to the next slide. You can get your own door float and prove it for yourself if there is room on the door for you and Jack or whoever else. If you're still wondering, hey, is there room? You can prove it for yourself. Go buy the float. Figure out if there's room for everyone. Listen, you guys, I just wanted to share that story if I'm being completely honest. No, the reason that I wanted to share the story of the Titanic was for a very specific reason. I want you to think for a second. I always ask you guys this, to put your thinking caps on. I want you to think about what it would have felt like to be there on the Titanic. As the Titanic is sinking, as sirens are going off, as women and children are boarding lifeboats. Maybe for some of you guys, you're like, yes, I'm a woman or a child. I'm in a high majority for safety right now. For the rest of us fellas in the room, we're not that lucky, and it's okay. We understand it. But listen, I want you to think for a second how you would feel as you're climbing into the lifeboat. These are freezing temperatures. The water is freezing cold. Most people died just from freezing to death in the water. How would you have felt? What would it have felt? Does that feel like a safe place in that moment? Does that feel like a desirable place in that moment? Does that feel like a place that maybe you need some help in that moment? And the reason I point that out is because when we talk about the good news of the gospel, when we talk about who Jesus is and what he's done, that Jesus has saved us and rescued us, I don't feel like we feel the weight of it. Like if we were sinking on the Titanic. We don't feel like we're in this dire situation. We don't feel like we just desperately need someone to come save us. If I was honest, if I took a temperature of the room of how we viewed it, I feel like it would feel like we're on the Titanic, but it's just taking on a little bit of water. Like, yeah, it's not ideal. It's a little inconvenient, but it's not like we're sinking, right? That's how we view the saving that Jesus is doing. It's nice, it's beneficial to us, but we weren't really in that much need. We weren't sinking in freezing waters, desperate for help outside of ourselves. See, that's the good news of the gospel, is that's where we were. We were in desperate need for a help. We were in desperate need to be saved, and God sent a rescuer. So for the rest of our time here tonight, we're going to be in the book of Colossians. And I just have a few verses. If you have Bibles, there's some Bibles in the seats. You can turn to Colossians chapter 1. I want to give us a roadmap for the night. And I want to answer 4 questions that we're going to see in these couple of verses in Colossians. The first question is, what were we rescued from? The second question is, who rescued us? The third question is, how did they do it? And then the fourth question is, how do we respond to it? What were we rescued from? Who rescued us? How did they do it? And how do we respond? So, first question, what were we rescued from? Colossians chapter 1, verse 13. It says, he has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. I asked the question earlier, do you really believe that you needed to be rescued? Do you really believe that you had a need? Do you really believe that you needed help? The Apostle Paul tells us right here is that we have been delivered, that we have been saved, that we have been rescued from the domain of darkness. This word domain here is meant to communicate authority or rule. That we were under the authority, that we were under the rule of darkness. That's where we were. That's where we needed to be rescued from. Darkness had authority over us. And that's so different from the way we think. We think we have control. We think we're the ones making the decision. We think we know what's best, and what we don't know is that we are being influenced by the darkness that has authority over us. That there is something influencing us, speaking to us, lying to us, telling us that we know what's best, telling us that what God says isn't true, that God doesn't want what's best for us, and we begin believing that. You see, the domain of darkness doesn't want you to believe that the ship is really sinking. It's just taking on a little bit of water. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna be fine. It's not that big of a deal. But we talked about it last week in John's gospel, John 3:16 and 17, that Jesus came to save and not to condemn, that he came to bring people out of the darkness and into the light. And that's exactly what it's saying right here. He says he came to bring people out of the darkness and into the kingdom of the Son. That we have been brought out of the darkness into the light. And listen, when you're in the dark, you're in a really scary place, right? This is the main plot line of 90% of the scary movies that you will watch. Things are dark and it is dangerous, all right? If you can understand that, you can go make your own scary movie right now. You're in the dark, you don't know what's around you, things are scary, but there is a spiritual reality that is true when it's talking about the domain of darkness, is that there is danger in the darkness, students. There is danger in the darkness. The darkness does not want what's best for you. The darkness lies for you. The darkness lets us believe that what we want is best, that what we know is best. The darkness is where sin rules. And Paul tells us in the book of Romans that it's in the darkness where we trade the truth of God for a lie and believe that we know what's best for us, that we can become our own gods. There's danger in the darkness, students. And it says that we've been transferred into the kingdom of the Son. The best way I could explain this to you, maybe some of you have moved and transferred schools before. I remember when I was in middle school, I moved. And there's a big change, right? Like I no longer lived at my old home, I lived at a new home. I no longer went to my old school, I went to my new school. There's a change in identity, there's a change in location, there's a change in behavior. And what he's saying is, hey, you have a new location, you have a new home, you have new behavior. You're not in the same place. You have moved, you've been rescued, you have a new house, you have a new home, and it's with the Son now and things are different. So that's our first question. What were we rescued from? And like I said, I feel like it's so easy for us to sit right here and not believe that our sin is as bad as it really is, to not believe that our sin is what put Jesus on a cross, to not believe that our sin separates us eternally from God without someone coming in to rescue us. It's so easy to sit here and believe that the darkness isn't really that bad, that yes, Jesus has called us to live a certain way and called us to do certain things, but it's not like the ship is sinking. That's the lie that he's telling you. So our first question, what were we rescued from? Our second question is, who rescued us? We have the good news. We have been rescued, but who is our rescuer? Paul continues. Verse 15, it says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. As Paul is writing this right here, he's writing to a very religious group of people. He had already visited these people before, and he's writing to these Colossians, and he knew that they liked the idea of Jesus, but they also liked all these other spiritual ideas that Jesus was kind of, they liked that Jesus was God, but Jesus wasn't technically the only God. Jesus was one way to heaven. Maybe Jesus was the best way to heaven, but you can kind of figure out yourself. And there's all these ideas. And Paul is saying, hey, I need you to understand how entirely unique, how entirely different this Jesus is, this one who's rescuing you, this one who's saving you. He's saying he is so different. He says all things were created by them, and he didn't just create it and just kind of let it be. It's actually still at this very moment being held together by him. that at any moment, without the active power of God, everything that we would know would cease to exist. The breath in our lungs, the oxygen in our atmosphere, the way our world works, how far we are from the sun, that everything that it takes for us to live the life that we live is literally held together by the power of God. And it's not just something he set up, he's actively still doing it to this day. He created all things, he holds them all together. Then it says he is preeminent. It's kind of a big word. Preeminent means like to be first, to hold the first place, or to be above all other places, to be the most important. To quote the great theologian Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last. That's what he's saying here. He says there is only one first place. I feel like you guys can understand that. A lot of you play sports. Maybe you're starting practice right now and you're prepping for a season. And right now, I promise you at your team meetings, you guys aren't getting together and you're getting excited. And you're like, this is the year we're going to get third place, right? That's not what your team meetings are, right? No, it's first place, because first place has specific significance. I'm sorry for those of you that maybe aren't on a good team and winning isn't likely in your future, but first place is better. First place is better. And he says, listen, I don't want you to miss this. He says, in every area of your life, in every area of creation, in all things, that Jesus holds the first place. In everything, that there's not an area of your life where he is not first. Listen, your family is great, and you should love your family, but they can't be first place. They can't handle the weight of that. They will fail you. Your boyfriend or girlfriend or future relationship or even future husband or wife or whatever it is, that's all great, but that can't be first place. They will fail you. They are not good enough. They're not perfect. They don't hold all things together. Here's the point I believe he's making here, that Jesus alone is worthy to be first in your life. Jesus alone is worthy to be first in your life. No one else is worthy enough. Nothing else is worthy enough. Everyone and everything else will fail you at some point, and Jesus never has, and Jesus never will. And when you were at your very worst, and when you were in the depth of your darkness and your sin, that is the moment that Jesus loved you more than you have ever been loved by your mom or your dad or your friends, and loved you enough to live a life that you never could, and die a death that you deserve, and go to a cross so that you can have hope, so that you can have life. That is why he's the only one worthy of first place. Find me someone else who's willing to do that. Find me someone else who has the ability to do that. He's the only one that holds the first place. Our next question was, how did he do that? Paul tells us in verse 19. It says, for in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of the cross. He says to reconcile all things. This word reconcile means to make things right. That he brought peace by his blood. Why did we need peace? Well, he says that in the next verse. Verse 21, he says, and you who were once alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds. You want to know why Jesus had to go to the cross? You want to know why you needed to be rescued? You want to know why Jesus had to bring peace? It's because you were an enemy of God. Said you were hostile in mind, that you were doing evil deed in the darkness. That is who you were before Christ. And maybe for some of you in this room, that is who you are right now in this very moment. And a rescuer is available. He continues, he has now reconciled in his body of his flesh by his death in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a minister. I asked the question at the beginning, do you realize how bad your situation is? That you were in the domain of darkness. Thank you. That you were in the domain of darkness, that you needed help desperately. That you needed a hope that you didn't have for yourself. You weren't just taking on water, you were sinking on the Titanic in frozen water, in desperate need of something to save you and rescue you. That's how bad our situation was, and the cost of peace, the cost of rescuing was Jesus on the cross. And he says, but we have a hope. He says, don't shift from the hope of the gospel. That Jesus is who he said he was. That Jesus did everything he said he did. And he said one day, not only did he do that in the past, not only is he saving us right now in this moment, but he said one day you are going to see God face to face. And he says, on that day, I am going to present you holy and blameless and perfect in front of the Father. And he is not going to see your sin. He is not going to see your shame. He is not going to see your past. He's going to see the righteousness of Jesus in you. You're going to be holy and blameless before him. And on that day, he will say, well done, my good and faithful servant. That is the reality of the gospel. That is why the gospel is good news. If you're taking notes, my last point for you is this. The life-changing power of the gospel brings hope. The life-changing power. Hello? The life-changing power of the gospel brings hope. And maybe for you today in this room, you just simply need some hope. The words that Paul used when he says that we should not shift from the hope of the gospel. In that time period, the area that they were lived in was known for a lot of earthquakes, and it's literally the word that they would use for destruction caused by an earthquake. And maybe for you, it feels like an earthquake has hit your life, something going on in your family, something that's happened to you personally, something that's going on in a friend's life, maybe even your faith and what you believe. You're in school and it's being challenged and it's being questioned. Listen, you are in a stage of your life where it's going to feel like things are shifting and that the hope that you have isn't real. But when you realize the truth, you're not just on a ship taking on water, you are sinking in the sea, but you're not sinking without hope. You have a rescuer. You have a Savior who lived and died and did the thing that you never could. So how do we respond to this? That Jesus is who he said he is, the good news of the gospel. That we were in desperate need of a rescuer and Jesus came and he did that by dying a death on the cross for us. And he made peace between us and God. What is our response? That we would begin to follow him and grow in our relationship with him. That is what this whole series is about. What do we do with Jesus? Well, we understand that the gospel is true. And we begin to love people like Jesus did in the relationships around us. And there's going to be areas of our life that he's going to ask us to be obedient in. And it's going to be very difficult for you. And as we be obedient, we grow closer and closer to Jesus. And he's going to provide good works for us to work out our faith. And we will grow closer to him. He wants us to grow. That is our response. And that is what he wants for you.
Maybe for some of you in this room, you walked in here and you didn't realize how bad your situation was. You don't have a relationship with Jesus and you are sinking, and you didn't know that there was hope. You didn't know that there was someone who came to rescue you. Can I tell you, you have hope, and his name is Jesus. Maybe there's others of us in this room and we know Jesus and we have been rescued, but we're living our life like the ship was just sinking and it didn't really matter that much to begin with. May we desperately remember how bad our situation was and how good our Savior was, that he lived and died so that we could have hope and we could have life. Pray with me.